Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Would Australia defend Taiwan if Beijing invaded the island? And would it follow Washington's lead? We spoke to Kevin Andrews, former Australian Minister for Defense and a contributor with the Epoch Times, for details. Kevin Andrews, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
My pleasure.
So you recently wrote an article called "Australia Finally Gets the Defenses It Needs as AUKUS Clears Final Hurdle." Can you expand on that? What are these defenses and what's the final hurdles that have been crossed?
When I was Defence Minister, we had decided that we wanted new submarines by the mid to late 2020s. With the French arrangements and then all the saga that was surrounding that, that pushed out the possibility of getting a submarine until probably the early to mid 2030s. So that left us with a 10-year additional capability cap on top of an ageing Collins-class submarine. The Collins-class is a diesel-electric submarine. It was good for its day. It's probably functional still, but compared to a nuclear submarine, it's simply not in the same class. So what this arrangement has done has meant that by being able to have a rotation of American and UK submarines from 2027, that capability gap which we identified at the time I was the Defence Minister is in fact being plugged again, but albeit in a different way.
And speaking of AUKUS, it seems the U.S. and Australia have also announced plans to develop a hypersonic aircraft. This is the latest in the deal. What's the significance here?
The significance is that the pace of change in terms of technology is so rapid that we have to be, very much up to date. So nuclear submarines under the sea is obviously part of that, but obviously other nations are testing hypersonic missiles, and this opportunity for us to develop hypersonic warfare through not just missiles, but indeed potentially through planes, is really the next generation in terms of what can be achieved in the sky. This sharing of technology between the three countries, Australia, America and the United Kingdom, which is really the most important and significant part of the AUKUS arrangements.
And on that note of aggression, it seems if we look at the Chinese regime's movements in the area, one area of concern has been the Solomon Islands. They signed that security pact with Beijing, and in terms of Australia, what does that mean for Australia?
This means that we potentially have an aggressive, hostile military force on our doorstep. If one goes back to the Second World War, it was the great aspiration of the then Japanese fleet commander to actually control islands in the South Pacific, such as the Solomons, Samoa, Tonga, etc. If that was to be able to be achieved, you effectively cut off supply lines from a very isolated Australia. Now, what we have now is China seeking to extend its influence into that very same region. It's been trying to, build a port in Papua New Guinea, which has been rejected so far by the government of Papua New Guinea. We see there's the arrangements in the Solomons. It's tried in Palau. There has been reports from the outgoing president of Micronesia of bribery of officials and members of Parliament or Congress in Micronesia. There's been building or attempt to build ports and other facilities in countries, Pacific Island countries like Samoa and Tonga. So this is very much a threat to Australia's security, as I said, in our own backyard.
And on that note, in terms of a Beijing invasion of Taiwan, would Australia step in to help, or would that be more to see what the U.S. does first and then see what Australia's steps are?
My sense is that we will consider what the United States does. Under the arrangements we have with the United States, we're very close to the United States. I'm sure if we were called upon by the United States to act, then we would do so. It's almost unbelievable that we wouldn't if we were called upon to do so.
And going back to your article from earlier, you did write that if Taiwan falls to the CCP or the Chinese Communist Party, the security of the Indo-Pacific will be greatly endangered, and Australia is not immune from events in our region. What should Australia's next steps be to kind of shore up their own defenses?
Well, the first thing Australia must do is what it is doing, but continue the pace of this development, and that is to ensure that we have the military equipment necessary to defend Australia and also to act as a deterrent to any aggressive countries that want to break the international rules of the sea, who want to invade another country, etc. Secondly, we must act in conjunction with other countries. That means that there might be various agreements or understandings. AUKUS is just one between Australia and the United Kingdom. There's the Quad arrangements which involve India. There are arrangements with Japan. There are countries which are not part of these particular arrangements who are nonetheless concerned about what's happening in the China Sea. Vietnam, for example, the Philippines, which is increasing its exercises with the United States at the present time. So from my perspective, there's not going to be just one multinational agreement which relates to how we deal with these problems. There'll be a whole number of agreements, AUKUS being just one of them, the Quad being another, and then bilateral arrangements with other countries to ensure that we're acting in concert and we're all acting in a way in which we will deter any action which would bring about actual conflict.
And expanding on that note, you mentioned AUKUS and also the Quad. And if we look at that area of the Pacific, you have the first island chain that blocks off the Chinese military from really getting into the Pacific. And it seems the Chinese regime has been almost trying to build their own Quad around that by maybe with the Solomon Islands and these deals in the Pacific Islands. So what should allies be doing? What should the next steps be there?
Well, we have to continue our diplomatic efforts in countries like the Solomons and the other islands in the South Pacific and indeed throughout the Indo-Pacific, the Asian archipelago. That's important. There was probably a time when we regarded those diplomatic efforts as kind of second tier. I'm going back, decades or so. But they are, for Australia's perspective, very much first tier activities now, and we have to continue those diplomatic efforts. Secondly, we can't take the region for granted. We have to be in there, and we have to be saying that, we're your nearest best neighbour. We're the ones who have been there when there have been natural disasters in the Indo-Pacific. It's Australian defence personnel who have gone in to help. And reminding these countries, not in any sort of aggressive or patronising way, but reminding them that we have been there, we are peaceful and democratic in our intentions. We're not there to establish a military base and to buy off the country and then leave if we need to. We're there for the long term as we have been, and that's what's going to be most important for the welfare and the peace and the prosperity of their people.
Kevin Andrews, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.